If you're just getting started with Skyrim, then this video is going to show you everything, and I really do mean everything that you need to know as a new player. I've pulled together the most relevant content from my expansive Skyrim library to give you the ultimate beginner's guide. We're going to be covering character creation, skills, leveling, guilds, core systems, crafting, gold making, DLC content, and much, much more. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's go on this learning journey together. In this first section, I'm going to show you the best race choice for your playstyle, as this is going to be the first big decision you make in the game. Choosing the right race will give you a nice boost in the early game, as well as ensuring you have the best passive abilities and racial powers for your build in the long run. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be grouping builds into three broad categories: warrior builds, mage builds, and thief builds. But what if you have no idea which type of build you actually want to play? Well, in that case, you can't go too far wrong with the Breton. This is because the Breton race is just a solid all-rounder due to their powerful magic resistance abilities being useful in pretty much any situation in which you're taking magic damage, of which there will be many. All other races have abilities that are either suited to a certain playstyle, or, to be honest, that are just pretty useless. Whereas the Breton's 25% magic resistance and dragon skin greater power will be useful for any build. The 25% magic resistance is pretty self-explanatory, you'll take 25% less damage from all magic, and the dragon skin greater power allows you to absorb 50% of the magicka from hostile spells for 60 seconds once per day, which can easily be the difference between life and death when fighting enemy spellcasters. On top of this, Bretons receive a +10 bonus to their conjuration skill, as well as +5 to their alchemy, alteration, illusion, restoration, and speech skills, which basically gives them a bit of an advantage for certain mage builds early in the game. And finally, Bretons start with the Conjure Familiar spell, allowing them to summon a spectral wolf to assist them in battle, which can serve as some extra damage or as a useful distraction in certain situations. In summary, Breton is a solid choice for any build and easily one of the best overall races in the game. Moving on to the best races for warrior builds, and starting with my top pick, which is Orc. The reason for this is their supremely powerful Berserker Rage greater power. This ability causes you to take half damage and deal double damage for 60 seconds once per day, effectively turning you into an absolute monster for the duration and giving you the upper hand in particularly difficult fights. This ability alone makes them hands down the best melee fighter in the game. On top of this, Orcs also start with a +10 bonus to heavy armor, as well as +5 to block, enchanting, one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, and smithing. An overall solid mix of warrior-based skills to give you that boost in the early game. Secondly, we have the Nords. They're not quite as powerful as the Orcs for warrior builds, but they're also not as ugly either. They receive the Battle Cry greater power, which causes targets around them to flee for 30 seconds and is usable once per day. This can be a pretty useful ability if you're taking heavy damage and need to buy some time to heal up or perhaps to run away. Alongside this, Nords also gain a 50% frost resistance, which can be pretty useful when dealing with some of the particularly annoying frost spells in the game. In terms of skill bonuses, Nords receive +10 to two-handed weapons, as well as +5 to block, light armor, one-handed weapons, smithing, and speech, which provides pretty solid starting stats for an offensive warrior build in the early game. Overall, not a bad choice at all, and of course being a Nord is very on theme for Skyrim. The third option that's worth considering for warrior builds is Redguard. This is primarily based on their Adrenaline Rush greater power, that allows them to regenerate their stamina 10 times faster for 60 seconds once per day. This basically translates to unlimited power attacks during that 60-second window, and subsequently the ability to deal a huge amount of damage, which could very easily turn a difficult fight in your favour. Redguards also receive a 50% resistance to poison, which could easily be the difference between life and death in certain scenarios. And in terms of their skill bonuses, Redguards get +10 to one-handed weapons, as well as +5 to alteration, archery, block, destruction, and smithing, which makes them a decent choice for a classic sword and shield build early in the game. Overall, they're certainly not as strong as Orcs, but they make for another nice alternative. Let's move on to the best race for mages, starting with my top recommendation, the High Elves. Though annoyingly arrogant at times, the High Elves possess the Highborn Greater Power, which allows them to regenerate magicka 25 times faster for 60 seconds once per day, basically turning them into an unstoppable maelstrom of magical damage and allowing them to easily best almost any enemy. It's hands down the most powerful offensive magic ability of any race. On top of this, they also get a plus 50 bonus to their magicka pool, which is particularly noticeable early on, and they also start with the Fury spell, which causes creatures and people up to level 6 to attack anything nearby for 30 seconds. Which isn't game changing and any race can learn this spell, but it's certainly a useful spell to have and a nice one to get for free at the very start of the game. Then in terms of skill bonuses, they receive plus 10 to Illusion, as well as plus 5 to Alteration, Conjuration, Destruction, Enchanting and Restoration. Basically a bonus to every school of magic, making them the ideal early game spellcaster. Secondly, I'm going to once again point to the Bretons. We already mentioned them as the best all-rounder due to their powerful magic resistance abilities, but it's also worth noting in the context of mage builds that their initial skill bonuses in Conjuration, Alteration, Illusion and Restoration make them particularly well suited to these types of builds in the early game. You can of course skip back to the Breton section for the full detail. A third option for mage builds that can be pretty fun is the Dark Elves. Their Ancestor's Wrath Greater Power is very on theme for a fire mage, dealing 8 points of fire damage per second to nearby opponents for 60 seconds once per day, which is pretty strong in the early game. Though I do have to caveat here that the spell becomes less and less useful as the game progresses due to the fact that it doesn't scale well, and eventually it does become almost useless. As well as this greater power, Dark Elves also receive a 50% resistance to fire, and get access to the Sparks ability, which is a channeled spell that deals 8 points of shock damage per second to your enemy. Of course, any race can eventually learn this spell, but it's nice to get something for free and from the very start of the game. When it comes to starting skill bonuses, Dark Elves get a plus 10 boost to Destruction, as well as plus 5 to Alchemy, Alteration, Illusion, Light Armor and Sneak. Overall providing a nice early game bonus for offensive magic builds, especially when paired with the greater power and the Sparks ability. That brings us on to Fief builds, which are a little different as there isn't really a racial power that's particularly strong for Fief playstyles, like the High Elf greater power is for mages, for example. In my opinion, this actually makes Bretons, surprise surprise, probably the best longer term choice for Fief builds. However, there are definitely some superior choices for Fief builds early in the game, based on the starting skill bonuses that these races have to offer. And for many more casual players, that smoother start might well be the priority anyway. Firstly, you have the Wood Elves, who get a plus 10 bonus to archery, making them the best early game stealth archer, which is a very popular build. They also receive a plus 5 bonus to Alchemy, Light Armor, Lockpicking, Pickpocket and Sneak, offering a pretty solid range of Fief skills on top of that nice archery bonus. They are however let down a little by their greater power, which allows you to turn an animal into an ally for 60 seconds once per day. And while it can be useful at times, it's a pretty situational skill, as clearly there has to be an animal present at the time you want to use it in combat, which won't often be the case. The Wood Elves do however also receive a 50% resistance to both poison and disease, which can certainly help keep you alive in situations involving those types of damage. Secondly, you could consider making a Khajiit for your Fief build, as much like the Wood Elves, their starting skill bonuses align very nicely with the Fief playstyle. They receive a plus 10 bonus to Sneak, as well as plus 5 to Alchemy, Archery, Lockpicking, Pickpocket and one-handed weapons, which is probably the strongest skill alignment to the purest definition of a Fief playstyle. You know, actually stealing things rather than being more of a stealthy assassin. Khajiit also possess the Night Eye greater power, which allows them to see in the dark for 60 seconds, which can be useful at times, but it really isn't game changing. And finally, they also receive a bonus to unarmed. Again, not particularly game changing unless you want to go for a very niche unarmed build. Finally, in the thief category, we have the Argonians. They offer a very similar set of starting bonuses to the Khajiit, with a plus 10 boost to lockpicking, as well as plus 5 to alteration, light armor, pickpocket, restoration, and sneak. Again, very closely aligned to the traditional thief playstyle. They also possess the Hist skin Greater Power, allowing them to recover health 10 times faster for 60 seconds once per day, which actually isn't a bad heal if you get yourself in trouble while sneaking around. And on top of that, they get a 50% resistance to disease, the ability to breathe underwater, and a small bonus to their unarmed damage. All in all, not a bad choice for a thief build. Now, if you've been paying close attention, you may have realised that there is one race that hasn't featured in any category, and that is the Imperials. This is because I don't see them as being a particularly good fit for any of the three main playstyles. Their Voice of the Emperor Greater Power calms nearby people for 60 seconds once per day, which can be good for de-escalating a situation and allowing you the opportunity to recover or escape. However, you could achieve basically the same effect with the Nord Battle Cry, for example, which also affects creatures as well as people, and you'd also get their 50% frost resistance. Imperials do also have the Imperial Luck ability that causes them to find more gold, though again it has pretty low impact as the vast majority of gold comes from selling things rather than finding gold. In terms of their starting skill bonuses, they get plus 10 to Restoration, as well as plus 5 to Block, Destruction, Enchanting, Heavy Armor, and one-handed weapons. Again, it just feels a bit all over the place, though perhaps you could argue it's a nice set of starting bonuses for a paladin type build, utilising healing spells alongside a sword and shield setup. Overall, the Imperials aren't necessarily bad, there are just generally better choices for most playstyles in my opinion. Next up, I'm going to show you how the skills-based leveling system works in Skyrim, as it underpins many of the other decisions you'll need to make for your character.
And to be clear up front, this guide is aimed at beginners who want to get a fundamental understanding of the system, as well as some of the pitfalls to avoid. It's not a guide on how to level at ultra speed using various exploits, which as far as I'm concerned is the fastest way to ruin the experience of a new player. Anyway, the first thing to understand is that there are basically two kinds of leveling in Skyrim: skill leveling and overall character leveling. In very simple terms, the system works like this. There are 18 different skills in the game, broadly grouped into mage, warrior, and thief skills. All 18 of these skills are available to you from the moment you start the game, and there are no restrictions whatsoever on which skills you can use. This is due to the fact that Skyrim features an entirely classless system in which you're not forced down a particular path, as is the case in many other similar RPGs. There are no strict classes such as mages, warriors, paladins, or rogues for example, and your character can be any combination of these traditional archetypes. You could be a fire mage clad in heavy plate armor, or a stealthy archer who specializes in conjuration magic. It's really up to you. All you need to do is focus on leveling the skills that support your chosen playstyle. How do you do this? Well, simply by using them. For example, hitting an enemy with a two-handed weapon will level your two-handed skill, blocking attacks with a shield will level your block skill, and casting destruction spells on enemies will level your destruction skill. It's a very natural and satisfying way to progress your character. The number of skill uses required in order for you to gain a skill level will progressively increase as you continue to improve that skill. For example, your first two-handed skill level might require you to hit an enemy 20 times with your two-handed weapon, whereas your second skill level might require you to hit that same enemy 40 times. That's in very basic terms at least. You can look up the exact mathematics if that appeals to you, but it's totally unnecessary. Every skill in the game starts at level 15, unless you've picked a race that provides an initial boost to that particular skill. Basically, every race in the game has a set of skill bonuses, and while it's not massively impactful overall, it can give you a nice little boost in the early game to pick a race whose skill bonuses align with the skills that you want to focus on. For example, the High Elf race starts with a boost to every magic skill, making them a good choice for a mage type character in the early game. However, there are more important considerations when it comes to race choice than these minor skill bonuses, and I'll actually put a link to my Skyrim race guide in the description down below if you want to know more about that. In fact, I have a whole series of Skyrim guides on my channel, as well as many other RPG based videos, so maybe consider subscribing if you're interested. Anyway, the skill leveling system is also what drives the overall leveling system for your character. Basically, when you gain a skill level, you also gain experience towards your overall character level. Once you've gained enough experience through this process, your character will of course gain a level. And at this point, you'll have two actions that you're going to need to take. Firstly, you'll be asked to increase one of your 3 main attributes by 10 points. These attributes are health, magicka, and stamina. Health increases your overall hit points, magicka increases your overall magicka, and you guessed it, stamina increases your overall stamina. Not much to say about that. However, you also gain a perk point to spend, which will require a little more thought. Perk points can be spent in the perk trees that are attached to each of the 18 skills, and when you spend a perk in one of these trees, you'll gain either an active or passive ability that will improve that particular skill. Let's take archery as an example. Early on, you only really have one choice in this tree, and that's to increase the damage that you deal with bows. However, as you progress through the tree, you'll unlock some more interesting perks, such as the ability to zoom in and go into slow motion when aiming a shot. You may have also noticed while I've had this perk tree up that the majority of perks require a certain skill level to unlock. For example, the Eagle Eye perk that I'm showing here requires you to have 30 skill in archery in order to unlock. So obviously it's important to make sure that you're leveling the skills that you actually want to spend your perk points in, which will typically happen naturally, but you can get caught out if your plan is to level an easy skill, such as block, and then spend your points in a harder skill to level, such as one of the crafting based skills for example. Speaking of needing a particular skill level to unlock certain perks, it's important to note that your skill level will also dictate the spell tomes that are available to you. The reason for this is because these tomes are the primary way for you to learn new spells for your destruction, restoration, alteration, illusion, and conjuration skills. It works like this. As you level your skill in any of these different schools of magic, vendors will start to sell higher level spell tomes for that particular school, as well as them being dropped as random loot. Though typically you're going to be purchasing these tomes from vendors rather than hoping that the right one will randomly drop. And the skill levels required for tomes to become available at vendors are as follows. Novice spell tomes are available at skill level 0, apprentice tomes are at skill level 15, which you start with anyway so it may as well be 0. Adept tomes can be purchased at skill level 40, and expert tomes at skill level 65. Then finally, master tomes can be unlocked via quests that will become available from the College of Winterhold at skill level 90+. One final note on spells is that when it comes to leveling your magic skill, higher level spells are worth more skill experience than lower level spells, meaning that you'll need to cast fewer high level spells to gain a level in that particular skill. Though that doesn't necessarily make them the most efficient way to level, as you need to also consider magicka efficiency as well as the nature of the spell itself and how it functions. Anyway, let's talk about some of the major pitfalls that you're going to want to avoid when it comes to leveling in Skyrim. Firstly, and probably most importantly, the very nature of the leveling system in Skyrim can cause you to quite easily fall into a trap that will, ironically, make your character weaker and weaker as you level up. We already talked about the two types of leveling in Skyrim, and how character leveling is driven entirely by skill leveling. Well, this can create some interesting interactions between skill level and character level that can actually work against you. Say you spend all of your time in the early game hard focusing on leveling smithing, alchemy, enchanting, lockpicking, and speech, for example. You could get a pretty high level character by maxing out all of these skills. However, due to the game's level scaling system, your enemies will also scale to a pretty high level. The problem here is that you've achieved this high level without progressing a single combat-based skill, which means you're going to get absolutely clapped in combat by these scaled up enemies. So it's always a good idea to ensure that you're leveling at least one combat-based skill alongside your non-combat skills if you don't want to fall into this trap. Another mistake that you can easily make early on is missing the standing stones. If you follow the main quest at the beginning of the game and head straight to Riverwood, it's highly unlikely that you'll miss them. However, if you decide to just run off in a random direction after Halgan, which is very much an option in Skyrim, then you can quite easily miss them. Why is this a problem? Well, because the standing stones that you pass on the way to Riverwood are the Warrior, Mage, and Thief stones, and what they do is give you a blessing that allow your combat, magic, or stealth skills to level 20% faster. So by not having that blessing, your leveling is going to be slower, and as a consequence, it's going to take longer for you to unlock some of the cooler perks. It's also worth noting, by the way, that you can switch between any of these free blessings at any time by returning to the stones. And if you want to level a broader range of skills without constantly going back and forward to the stones to change your blessing, then you can find the Lover Stone to the northeast of Markarth, which will grant you with a blessing that will allow you to level all skills 15% faster, which to me is far more preferable to constantly switching blessings for the sake of 5%. The next pitfall is another pretty simple one, and that's wasting the skill levels that you can purchase from skill trainers. Basically, there are many skill trainers in the game who will offer to train you in a particular skill in exchange for gold. Now the issue here is that you can only purchase 5 of these skills per character level, and that's collectively across all trainers. You can't train 5 skills from all 18 different types of skill trainer per level. Oh, and you also can't use a trainer for skills over level 90. My recommendation is that you only use skill trainers for the more difficult or annoying skills to level. You may wish to use them for a skill that's particularly time consuming to level in the pursuit of efficiency, or just for a skill that you simply don't enjoy leveling regardless of how long it takes. It's personal preference really, and everything doesn't have to be ultra optimized for the sake of it. The final pitfall I want to mention is wasting your perks. The reason for this is that perk points become more and more difficult to obtain, just by virtue of leveling slowing down as the game progresses. In a system that allows you to easily reallocate your skill and perk points, this wouldn't be an issue. However, despite the massive build flexibility that Skyrim offers, changing your build can be quite time consuming. And this is because the systems that allow you to reset your skills are not particularly well implemented. In the base game, the only way to reset your perks is by totally resetting a skill after reaching skill level 100, which is the max by the way. This is known as making the skill legendary, which in itself is already a significant grind as you need to reach skill level 100 in the first place, which isn't quick. But it's not only that, as while you regain the perk points from the skill that you make legendary, you lose the skill level progress permanently, and you can't transfer that progress to another skill. So you'll then need to level up an entirely different skill in order to actually be able to use the refunded perk points. Not to mention that the original skill that you made legendary is now extremely weak as it's been reset to level 15. So let's hope you weren't dependent on it. There is actually a second method to resetting your perks, and it's available if you have the Dragonborn DLC installed and have completed the main storyline of that DLC. This method allows you to consume a dragon soul, which you get from killing a dragon, in order to refund your perks without resetting the level of that skill. Clearly this method's superior as firstly you don't have to get a skill to level 100 to refund its perk points, and secondly because you can refund those perk points without resetting the skill to level 15, which allows you to somewhat preserve the usefulness of that skill. However, you do have to complete an entire DLC storyline, kill a dragon, and of course level up the skill that you wish to spend your freshly refunded perks in. Basically, the skill reset systems in the game are pretty clunky and time consuming, so it's worth spending a bit of time thinking about your build before you commit to spending your perk points. Anyway, this brings us to our final section, which comprises some quick tips for leveling each skill. I'll state up front that this is in no way an exhaustive list, and that it's very much aimed at normal players who might need to catch up on a particular skill if they get behind, and they want to do so without using exploits. Let's start with the basic damage dealing skills, so one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, archery and destruction magic. Now typically all of these skills are going to level very naturally as you're going to be using them constantly. However, if you do get behind on one and you're struggling to level it the normal way because you're constantly getting claps due to the fact that you're doing no damage, then you could be a little more degenerate and simply use these skills on your own horse, which will allow you to level them without taking any damage yourself. When the horse is about to die, or if you run out of mana, you can use the wait function to reset both. If you have Shadowmere, the horse awarded during the Dark Brotherhood questline, this is even better as he has a very high health pool and you'll need to reset less frequently. You can also use certain unkillable NPCs for this method, but they may fight back, run away or call the guard, so it's a little more involved. Next up I've grouped light armor, heavy armor, block and restoration, which might seem like a bit of an odd combination, but there's an efficiency to be had here. Basically, to level all of these skills at the same time, you simply need to stand still and let a fairly weak enemy attack you. If you raise your shield, you'll gain block skill. If you don't, then you'll gain skill for whichever armor type you have equipped. And whenever your health drops, then you can simply cast a restoration spell in order to keep you alive while at the same time leveling your restoration skill. These skills will of course level faster if you're taking more powerful hits, so you can gradually move to harder hitting enemies to speed things up as you get a bit tankier. Another good pairing is Sneak and Pickpocket, and the reason that this works quite nicely is that Sneak can be leveled not just by sneaking around enemies, but also around friendly NPCs. This means that you can sneak around densely populated towns and pickpocket citizens in order to level both skills at the same time. Just don't get caught if you want to avoid jail time. It's important to remember that you'll only gain sneak skill while you remain undetected. And when it comes to pickpocketing, you may want to start by stealing lower value items as they have less chance of detection. However, they also offer lower skill gain. So the alternative is to hit quick save before you pickpocket, go for a high value item, then reload if you get caught. Very save scummy, but that's up to you I guess. It's also worth remembering that pickpocket in particular has no bearing on combat, so you may not want to overlevel it for the reasons that we covered earlier. And to avoid repeating myself, this also applies to all of the other non-combat skills we're about to cover. Speaking of which, let's talk about lockpicking next, which is a bit of a pain to be honest. Unless you want to do some really convoluted stuff late in the game to speed it up, basically you just have to pick locks. I'd suggest just leveling this skill as part of your natural gameplay. But if you want an area with plenty of locked doors to speed things up, then you can target the various cities at night when all of the citizens have locked up their houses. Honestly, it's not really worth it though, at least in my opinion, as it's incredibly boring and lockpicking doesn't have a major impact on your gameplay. The speech skill also falls into this category for me of not really being worth focusing on outside of naturally leveling it for your gameplay. Unless you really want to try and maximise the economy of course, then it does have value. So if this is you and you really do want to focus on speech, then repeatedly buying and selling individual items from vendors is probably the fastest way. Though be warned, you will need a lot of gold as the vendor is always going to sell you an item for more than they're willing to buy it back for. For the crafting oriented skills, so smithing, alchemy and enchanting, there isn't really a shortcut, but the simplest way to level is just to churn out a large number of low level goods for which the ingredients are plentiful. For smithing, that's items such as iron daggers. For alchemy, it's potions that involve easily obtainable herbs, such as those that you can find by the side of any given road. Or in the case of enchanting, applying low level enchants to your equipment, as well as frequently using soul gems to recharge your enchanted weapons. There's a huge amount to go into in terms of the free crafting based skills, and it's certainly beyond the scope of this video, but I do have detailed guides for each of them that I'll link in the description down below. Finally, let's talk about the remaining free magic skills that we haven't covered yet. 2 of them are incredibly easy, if a little boring, and 1 is a bit more involved. Let's start with the easy 2. For alteration, you simply need to get the Detect Life spell and repeatedly cast it in high population areas such as towns and cities, and for illusion you can pick up the Muffle spell and simply cast it as you walk around. It really is as easy as that. However, for the final skill, Conjuration, it is slightly more involved, and the challenge here is that you have to be in combat in order to level it. Basically what I tend to do is make myself as tanky as possible, and then just stand there repeatedly conjuring bound weapons. Or you could be a little cleverer and find a creative way to get into combat without actually being hit and do the same thing. But that's verging on an exploit, and I did say no exploits.
Okay, so at this point you've got a solid build and you know how character progression works. But now what? How do you even get started deciding on what to do first in this expansive open world? Well, you can't go far wrong with joining one of Skyrim's famous guilds and progressing their storylines. So in this section, I'm going to show you how to join every single faction in Skyrim, as well as covering the benefits of each. Let's start with the factions that force you to make a choice between them. First up, you have the Stormcloaks and the Imperials, the 2 factions involved in the Civil War storyline. In this case, there are no specific benefits to joining either faction, you just get to play out a different set of quests. And the quests aren't even really that different, to be honest. You basically participate in a number of battles to conquer Skyrim for the faction you choose. So in this case, I'd suggest you just join whichever one works for you thematically, or perhaps morally, but I won't get into that. You'll first be given the opportunity to join either faction as you're escaping Helgen. During your escape, you'll be given the option to join with either Ralof of the Stormcloaks or Hadvar of the Imperial Legion, and subsequently they'll give you a quest to join their respective faction. Don't worry though, you won't be locked in at this point, as you can choose to ignore the quest, and instead simply travel to the headquarters of the opposing faction and join them instead. For the Imperial Legion, you can join at this location in Solitude by speaking to General Tullius. And for the Stormcloaks, you can join at this location in Windhelm by speaking to Ulfric Stormcloak. Once you've aligned yourself with either faction, you'll get one further chance to change your mind. This happens at the end of the Jagged Crown quest, but after that, you're locked in for the rest of the playthrough. The next faction choice you'll eventually be asked to make is between the Blades and the Greybeards. This time you do get some benefits depending on the choice you make. If you side with the Blades, you can take anything you find in Skyhaven Temple, including the Dragonbane sword. You'll be able to complete 2 additional story quests, and you'll gain access to repeatable dragon hunting quests. On top of this, the Blades also provide the Dragon Slayer's Blessing, which gives you 10% improved critical strike chance when fighting dragons, and access to a potion that reduces the melee damage you take from dragons by 25%. Alternatively, if you side with the Greybeards, you'll be given a series of quests that give you the location of word walls, and their leader Parthenax will be able to train you in order to make your shouts more powerful. You can become a full member of the Blades by completing the quest that Delphine gives you to kill Parthenax, which she'll offer immediately after the quest Season Unending, in which the peace negotiations are conducted as part of the main storyline. However, it's worth noting that if you've already completed the Civil War questline, then Season Unending will be skipped, as there'll only be one faction remaining. In this case, you'll be able to get the quest by approaching Delphine at Skyhaven Temple after killing Alduin at the end of the main quest. Now, unlike the Blades, you don't really join the Greybeards, you just choose not to upset them by killing Parthenax. If you do kill him, the Greybeards will effectively shun you from that point onwards, and you'll no longer be able to improve your shouts or participate in their word wall quests. Though this won't stop you from finding the walls yourself in order to learn the associated shouts. The final faction choice comes with the Dawnguard DLC, where you'll choose between joining the Vampires of House Volkihar or the Vampire Hunters of the Dawnguard. The benefits here are far more interesting than the previous two choices. If you choose to join the Vampires, you'll be transformed into a powerful Vampire Lord with a whole new skill tree and set of abilities. For more information on that, I'll link my Skyrim Vampire Guide in the description. On top of this, you also gain access to Deathhound followers, and a number of expert and master level trainers, among other things. Alternatively, if you join the Dawnguard, you gain access to armoured trolls as followers, as well as several members of the Dawnguard, a number of different master level trainers, and access to a whole new weapon type, the crossbow. The main story of the DLC plays out in pretty much the same sequence regardless of your choice, but the perspective is different depending on which faction you align with. And you also gain a number of faction-specific side quests to participate in based on your choice. To join either faction, you'll need to travel to Fort Dawnguard at this location on the map and speak to Isran within the fort. You'll then receive a quest called Awakening that will send you to Dim Hollow Crypt in order to receive an artifact. During that quest, you'll meet a vampire called Serana, and she'll ask you to return her to her home at Castle Volkihar. As a reward for returning his daughter, Lord Harkon will offer to turn you into a vampire lord, aligning you with the vampires. Alternatively, you can reject his gift and then travel back to Fort Dawnguard to align yourself with the vampire hunters of the Dawnguard. Now let's move on to the big four factions that Elder Scrolls players will be familiar with from the previous games, even if they're named a little differently. Firstly, you have the Thieves Guild, which offers a number of benefits, including access to a fence to sell stolen goods, a number of master level trainers, unlimited Radiant quests, and the ability to eventually receive the Nightingale armour, blade and bow, as well as access to one of the best weapons in the game, Chillrend. And to be honest, that's not even close to an exhaustive list of the benefits, as I don't want the video to drag on forever. To me, the Thieves Guild is an absolute no-brainer to join, as even without the rewards, the quests are just really fun. It's also very easy to join. You simply need to travel to the Riften Marketplace in the daytime, which can be found at this location on the map. And here you'll be approached by an NPC called Brynjolf. He'll give you a quest to steal a ring from an NPC in the very same marketplace, which will kick off the quest chain that will ultimately result in you becoming a member of the Thieves Guild. You just need to follow along. Next up we have the Companions, who are quite similar to the Fighters Guilds of the previous Elder Scrolls games. The major benefit of joining the Companions is the ability to become a werewolf, which will unlock a whole new skill tree and set of abilities, resulting in a totally new playstyle. There's a werewolf guide on my channel if you're interested in knowing more about that, and I'll link it in the description down below. On top of this, you also gain access to expert and master level trainers, an unlimited supply of Radiant quests, and unique items such as Wufrad and the Shield of Iskramor. Joining the Companions is probably the easiest of all. You simply need to head to their headquarters in Whiterun at this location on the map and speak to Kodlak Whitemane. Moving on to the College of Winterhold, otherwise known as the Mages Guild. The benefits of joining include access to master level magic trainers, the ability to purchase spell tomes, the ability to recruit mage followers, and if you pair it up with membership of the Thieves Guild, access to a load of expensive items to steal within the college and then sell to a fence. It's an easy way to make some early money. As with the other major factions, you also get access to repeatable Radiant quests once you've completed the main story. To join, you simply need to travel to Winterhold at this location on the map and attempt to cross the bridge to the college. You'll then be confronted by Feralda, who will give you the first quest in the Mages Guild quest chain. You simply need to follow along in order to become a member. The last major faction you can join is the legendary Dark Brotherhood. Joining them will give you access to a number of armor sets, including the Ancient Shrouded armor set, which is arguably one of the best light armor sets in the game. You'll also gain access to a number of powerful weapons, such as the Blade of Woe, the most powerful horse in the game, Shadowmere, the ability to recruit followers and summon spectral assassins, access to master skill trainers, unlimited Radiant quests, and of course, one of the best storylines in the entire game. You also join the Dark Brotherhood in the most interesting way, at least in my opinion. Firstly, you need to travel to this location in Windhelm and speak to Aventus Aretino, and he'll give you a quest called Innocence Lost with the objective to kill Grella the Kind in Riften. Shortly after you complete this quest, you'll receive a mysterious letter with a black handprint on it, and the words, "We know." This is actually an optional step, but is very cool from a flavour perspective. Whether you've received the note or not, the important thing is that after completing the Innocence Lost quest, you need to go to sleep. You're then going to wake up in an abandoned shack in the middle of nowhere, and the quest to join the Dark Brotherhood will begin. Finally, there's a less well-known minor faction called the Bard's College. In terms of benefits, you basically get a handful of additional quests, 3 of which reward you with 6 skills per quest, resulting in you getting a skill point for each of the 18 skills in the game, and you also gain access to a master speech trainer. To join, you'll need to travel to the Bard's College in Solitude, which can be found at this location on the map, and you're going to need to speak to an NPC called Viamo. He will then set you off on a quest to retrieve an item on the college's behalf, ultimately resulting in you becoming a member of the college. Now, we briefly touched on skills earlier in this video, but if you want to build a truly overpowered character, then there are 3 skills that you're going to want to make a special effort with. These are the crafting skills, enchanting, alchemy and smithing. And in this next section, we're going to explore them in far greater detail. And just a heads up as we go into the second half of this very long video, as this is a mega compilation of all my guides effectively, or at least the relevant ones, then there might be some slightly out of context plugs for other videos, so apologies for that. The reason I say this is because most of the guides that I link to actually form part of this Ultimate Beginner's Guide, though please do feel free to explore my channel as there are many videos that I haven't included that you might find useful. Anyway, let's get straight into it with enchanting. Why bother with enchanting? Well, basically because it's going to make your character more powerful, significantly so in some cases. Your weapons are going to hit harder and apply special effects, and your armour and jewellery will offer you greater protection as well as a wide range of other useful bonuses. When you reach skill level 100, you're even able to add 2 enchantments to a single item, making it substantially more powerful. So it's well worth pursuing, especially if you want to play the game at higher difficulty levels. But how do you actually enchant an item? Well, first off, you're going to need to find an arcane enchanter, which is basically an enchanting station. And the easiest one to access early in the game is the one that you can find at this location within Dragon Reach Keep at Whiterun. Basically, enter the hall, walk towards the Jarl's throne and take a right, and in that room you'll find an enchanting station. To use the enchanting station, you're going to need 3 key things. Firstly, you're going to need an item to add an enchantment to. This could be a weapon or a piece of armour or jewellery. Secondly, you're going to need a filled soul gem, and finally you need a magic effect to apply to the item. Let's start by covering soul gems, as there's a good chance you already have 1 or more in your inventory by the time you reach Whiterun. Soul gems come in 5 standard varieties: petty, lesser, common, greater and grand. You can get both filled and unfilled gems from various vendors, or you can loot and steal them. The higher level the soul gem, the more powerful version of an enchantment you're going to be able to produce. There's a 6th variety called a black soul gem, and that can be used specifically to capture the soul of NPCs. And also there's an infinitely refillable soul gem called Azura's Star, or the Black Star. The version you get depends on the decision you make during the Black Star quest. Without going down that rabbit hole, Azura's Star is basically an infinitely refillable Grand Soul Gem, and the Black Star is an infinitely refillable Black Soul Gem. Oh, and it's worth noting that all Soul Gems aside from Azura's Star or the Black Star are single-use items. If you've got your hands on a filled Soul Gem of the appropriate size for the enchantment that you wish to make, then you're good to go. However, if you have an empty Soul Gem, then you're going to need to trap a soul inside it. To do so, you'll need to learn the Soul Trap spell, which requires you to be at least 25 skill in Conjuration, and for you to purchase the spell. Soul Trap is actually available for purchase from Farengar, who is conveniently located in the same room as the Arcane Enchanter within Dragon's Reach. Once you have the Soul Trap spell, you simply need to cast it on an enemy just before they die in order to trap their soul. For this to work, you need to make sure you have an appropriate level empty soul gem in your inventory for the trapped soul to fill. Basically, the more powerful the enemy, the more powerful the soul. If the soul gem you have is too small, it won't capture the soul. However, you can capture a less powerful soul in a higher level soul gem. This will happen if a lower level gem isn't available in your inventory. So watch out for this, because you don't want to pull out a grand soul gem for an enchantment and then find out that it only has a lesser soul in it. The game will always default to the most appropriate empty soul gem when you capture any given soul. So it makes sense to always keep a number of each type of soul gem in your inventory. You're also going to need a magical effect to apply to your item. And you can learn these effects by disenchanting the enchanted items that you loot during your adventures. To disenchant an item, you simply need to use the disenchantment option at the Arcane Enchanter, and you'll then have that magical effect available when creating your own enchanted items. If an item's greyed out, then you've already learned that magical effect. And if it doesn't appear in the list at all, it's one of the many items in the game that's not disenchantable. It's also important to note that disenchanting an item will permanently destroy it, so be careful. Once you have your filled soul gem and the spell effect that you want to apply, then you're ready to enchant your item. To do this, you first need to interact with the Arcane Enchanter, which will open the enchanting menu. You then need to select the item you wish to enchant. Following that, you need to select the magical effect that you want to apply to that item. Noting here that if the effect is greyed out, then that effect cannot be applied to that type of item. For example, you can't put a weapon effect on a piece of armor. If your item's a weapon, then you'll also need to use the slider to select the magnitude of the enchant. Basically, the more powerful you make the effect, the less charges the weapon will be able to hold. For non-weapon enchants, this step doesn't apply. Finally, you need to select a soul gem to use. If your item's a piece of armor or jewelry, then you'll notice that the magnitude of the enchant will increase as you select more powerful soul gems. Simple. However, if your item's a weapon, then the system is a little bit unintuitive. You might notice that as you move between the gems, it looks like nothing's really changing. The damage stays the same and the charge bar changes by what looks like a tiny amount. However, it's not a tiny amount, it's actually a massive impact to the number of charges that a weapon can hold. It's a bit awkward to preview the number of charges for each type of soul gem, as every time you select a different gem you have to go back and reselect the item to preview the maximum number of charges it can hold. For example, I'm now showing the difference between using a petty soul gem that's given me 15 charges of the shock enchantment for this bow with the slider maxed out, and now I'm showing a grand soul gem with the slider maxed out, which is going to give me 187 charges. This is an insane difference in how often you need to recharge your weapon. So basically, if you're going to be using that weapon, then it always makes sense to use the best soul gem you have available. Once you've done all of that, you simply need to select Craft, and you have your enchanted item. Now let's look at how to level your enchanting skill. Well, it's actually very simple. You just need to enchant and disenchant items, as well as using soul gems to recharge your enchanted items. Of course, you can try to be optimal by googling some speed leveling techniques if you want, but the basic premise is as simple as that. Now, if you're wondering whether it's actually worth leveling your enchanting skill all the way to 100, then the answer is yes. For every level you gain in enchanting skill, you're able to produce more powerful enchantments for your items. And this scales up to make your enchants 25% more effective at level 100. You'll also unlock a number of perks that greatly improve your enchanting ability, eventually even giving you the ability to put 2 enchantments on a single item, which is incredibly powerful. Rather than going through every single perk, I'll put the information on screen now so that you can pause and review it at your own pace. Using your enchanted items is very simple. Weapon enchants will activate when you hit an enemy, and armor enchantments will be permanently active. The most important thing to know is that every time you swing your weapon and hit an enemy, you're going to use up a charge. And when you run out of charges, you're going to need to top them up. This isn't the case for armor and jewelry, which never run out. To recharge an item, you'll once again be making use of filled soul gems. You simply need to select the weapon in your inventory, select recharge, and then choose which filled soul gem you want to use to recharge the weapon. A good tip here is to consider using up your smaller gems and saving your more powerful gems for enchanting purposes. And that's pretty much it for enchanting, so let's move on to alchemy. But before we do, did you know that alongside my substantial library of YouTube guides, I also offer beginner-friendly walkthroughs, downloadable written guides to have by your side while playing, and private Discord access where you can ask me questions directly. You can get all of this and more by joining the Vress Games Patreon. And as a bonus, you'll be supporting a creator who's selling their own useful and relevant content instead of pushing random sponsorships. If that sounds good to you, then you can join today using the Patreon link in the description down below. Okay, so let's move on to alchemy. So why bother with alchemy? Well, the potions provided can actually have a massive impact on the strength of your character. Not only can they restore health, magicka and stamina, but they can also enhance the damage of your weapons, provide powerful offensive and defensive buffs, and offer a whole range of other utilities and special effects. This is all particularly useful if you want to play at the higher difficulty levels, especially if you pair alchemy with enchanting to make your weapons and defensive capabilities even more powerful. Finally, alchemy can actually make you quite a bit of gold by just throwing some ingredients together into a potion and selling that rather than selling those ingredients individually. Oh, and just to note, I'm going to be using the term potion to basically cover both potions and poisons, as the process is exactly the same for both. So how do you actually make potions? Well, firstly you need to find an alchemy lab, and in the early game I'd recommend using the one located at Dragon's Reach Keep in Whiterun. Basically just run towards the Jarl's throne and take a right into Farengar's room to find it. My reasoning for this is that you need to go there anyway as part of the main quest. The door is never locked as it will be for some other locations, and is conveniently located right next to an enchanting station, which makes it a good place to progress both skills together. Then you're going to need to interact with the alchemy lab in order to open up the alchemy window. And from here you simply need to select up to 3 ingredients to combine and press craft. That's how you make a potion. But how do you know which ingredients to use? Well, every ingredient in Skyrim has 4 effects. And when you first find an ingredient, all of those effects are going to be listed as unknown, as you can see here. Now there are 2 primary ways to discover the effects of an ingredient. Firstly, you can consume an ingredient to discover its first effect. And if you've unlocked the Experimenter perk, you can actually discover all of its effects in this way. We'll talk more about perks later in the video. Secondly, you can experiment by mixing random ingredients at the alchemy lab and seeing which effects you discover. However, to discover the effects of an ingredient, you need to be successful in making a potion. And to be successful in making a potion, at least 2 of the ingredients that you combine must share an effect. If the ingredients don't share an effect, then you'll get a message saying potion creation failed. You won't discover any effects, and the ingredients will also be consumed. You'll notice though that once 2 ingredients have failed to combine into a potion, the next time you select one of those ingredients to add to a potion, the other will be greyed out. This is to indicate that the combination has failed previously, and it will be greyed out regardless of if you've identified the effects of those ingredients or not. It's basically a useful indicator of what not to combine when experimenting, and it avoids you wasting further ingredients. If you make a successful combination and create a potion, you'll discover the effect that the ingredients share. And if there's more than one shared effect, then you'll discover all of the shared effects. Once you've discovered an effect, it'll be very clearly visible when you view the ingredient. And a filter will also be created within the alchemy window that you can click on to display ingredients that you have discovered that particular effect for. So now that you understand how to make potions, you can basically take it in 2 directions. Firstly, you could be really purist about it and experiment until you discover the effects of every ingredient. If you want to go that way, then there are some clues in the game as to which ingredients to combine. For example, there are written recipes that you can find on your adventures or from talking to certain NPCs. And you can also look at which ingredients grow close to one another, or that are placed together on the shelves in shops, as this will usually indicate that they share some effects. However, there is going to be plenty of trial and error involved. Alternatively, you could just Google all of the different combinations if you don't fancy going down the experimentation route. That's up to you. It's one thing to know how to make potions, but to really maximize the quality of your potions, you're going to need to level your alchemy skill. For every skill level you gain in alchemy, your potions will become more effective, scaling up to 50% more effective when you reach level 100. An enormous boost when you think about, for example, the additional healing or damage that would provide. You also gain access to a number of perks that greatly increase the strength of your potions, enable you to discover more effects when consuming ingredients,
and remove the negative effects from the potions you create, as well as a number of other benefits. I'll put them all up on the screen now so you can pause and review them at your own pace. How do you level your skill and unlock these perks? Well, it's simple. You basically need to make potions, and you also gain a very small amount of XP when you discover an effect when consuming an ingredient. It can be a bit of a slow process, but the benefits are worth the effort, especially if you're trying to play at higher difficulty settings. Finally, let's talk about where to find ingredients. The simple answer is you find them everywhere, and my main tip for a new player is just to loot every ingredient you come across. This way you can level alchemy naturally as part of a normal playthrough. If you run out of storage, it's probably worth getting hold of a player house, as this will greatly increase your storage capacity. I'll put out a video on how to get player houses soon, and it will be in the same playlist as this video, so remember to subscribe if you're interested in that. Aside from just picking up everything you find, there are some quite simple things that you can do that will yield a large number of ingredients for minimal effort. I'll give you a few ideas to explore rather than an exhaustive list, otherwise this video would literally go on for hours. Firstly, if you're not above stealing, then you can visit the various alchemy shops across Skyrim and clear them out. Just don't get caught. The nice thing is, once you combine the ingredients into a potion, they no longer count as stolen goods, and therefore they can't be confiscated if you're arrested. Another idea that works well if you enjoy a picturesque hike is that you can wander along the main roads pretty much anywhere in Skyrim and come across a ton of flowers and herbs to pick. If you'd rather see a bit of combat whilst gathering your ingredients, you're going to find a large number of ingredients in certain types of dungeons. For example, any cave containing Falmer will likely be full of Chorus eggs, as well as the many mushrooms usually found in caves, and any Dwemer ruins will provide plenty of dwarven oil. There's also a whole bunch of ingredients that can be found in the College of Winterhold, though you will need to be a member of the Mages Guild if you want to gain access. Of course, if you have spare gold, you could also purchase ingredients from alchemy shops and general traders found in major cities, though I'd advise saving your gold for buying rarer ingredients only, rather than dumping it all on ingredients that are abundant. And finally, if you have the Hearthfire DLC and you've built yourself a player house, you can even plant your own garden from which you can obtain ingredients. Hopefully that's enough to get you started.
Before we move on to smithing, I am going to be a bit cheeky with a second plug for my Patreon, where you can gain access to exclusive beginner-friendly walkthroughs, downloadable written guides, and private Discord access where you can ask me questions directly. If you're interested, then you can find a link in the description down below. And again, this allows me to keep making free YouTube content like this without having to take random sponsorships to support the channel. Anyway, let's get into smithing.
So why bother with smithing in Skyrim? Well, basically because it will allow you to create some of the very best weapons and armor available in the entire game. This is particularly useful if you want to play at the higher difficulty levels, especially if you pair smithing with other skills such as enchanting and alchemy to really maximize the power of your character. So how do you actually make and upgrade items using smithing? Well, firstly, you're going to need to find the appropriate smithing equipment, which includes a grindstone, a workbench, and a forge or anvil. On top of this, you're also going to want access to a smelter and tanning rack in order to produce some of the base materials used in smithing. I'd recommend using the equipment available just outside of War Maidens in Whiterun, which can be found at this location on the map. Whiterun's a place that you're going to be sent to very early in the game, and you'll find everything you need here, including the ability to sell the goods that you make to the proprietors of War Maidens. The only things that you can't accomplish with the equipment outside of War Maidens is the creation of crossbows, which were added with the Dawnguard DLC and require the use of Gunmar's Forge in Fort Dawnguard, as well as the creation of ancient Nord armor and Nord hero weapons, which require the Skyforge that can be unlocked by completing quests for the companions. I have a video in the same playlist as this one that will show you how to join every faction in the game, including the Dawnguard and the companions. Once you've located your smithing equipment, you're then going to need to use the appropriate equipment for the smithing task that you're looking to accomplish. To create items, you're going to need to interact with either a forge or an anvil, which both serve the exact same purpose. Then to improve weapons, you're going to need to use a grindstone, and to improve armor, you'll need to use a workbench. Additionally, to produce the base materials to achieve these tasks, you'll also need to use a tanning rack to turn hides into leather, and a smelter to turn raw ore into metal ingots. Let's go through the process of creating a new item. Firstly, you need to approach a forge or an anvil and interact with it, and this will open the smithing forge menu.
From here, you can select a category from the left-hand side and find the item that you wish to create. Once you've selected an item, you'll see a preview of that item, as well as the materials required to craft it at the bottom of the screen. To unlock new categories of items, you're going to need to level your smithing skill and unlock the appropriate perks, which we'll cover in more detail in the final section of the video. But in very simple terms, there's basically a perk for each type of weapon and armor that you can create. The materials that you're going to need for smithing are largely going to be leather, metal ingots, and also gems when making jewellery. As mentioned previously, you can create leather at the tanning rack, and you do this by using animal pelts that you can collect from killing and looting wild animals. This is with the exception of netch leather, which was added in the Dragonborn DLC and doesn't actually require tanning. You can simply loot it from netches in an already usable form for smithing. The second key material that you're going to use in smithing is metal ingots, of which there are many different varieties that will enable crafting different types of weapons and armour. You can produce ingots at the smelter by using metal ores that you can mine all across Skyrim, as well as certain metals that you can loot from enemies and containers. Oh, and by the way, there's not actually any skill attached to tanning and smelting. Providing you have the appropriate raw materials, you'll be able to use the equipment to produce any variety of metal ingot or leather that you require for smithing. Finally, when creating jewellery, you're going to require gems, which can be found randomly when mining ore veins as well as through normal looting. Once you have all of the required materials, then you simply need to select Create, and you'll have your basic quality item. But how do you improve the item to its best possible quality? This is where the grindstone and workbench come in. The first thing to understand is that there are 6 levels of quality that you can upgrade to: Fine, Superior, Exquisite, Flawless, Epic, and Legendary. And your ability to upgrade weapons and armour to these qualities depends on your smithing skill level. As you can see from the information on screen, it can get slightly confusing in terms of how the perks that you can unlock from the smithing skill tree impact your ability to improve items. I'll try to summarise. Basically, when you unlock a perk, you'll not only be able to produce the associated type of weapons and armour, you'll also be able to improve that type of weapon or armour at a lower smithing skill level than you would without the perk. Let's use steel as an example. If you don't have the steel armour perk, well then firstly you won't be able to make steel armour, so you'd have to find it. And then to improve it to say flawless, you'd need 100 skill in smithing. Whereas if you have the steel perk unlocked, you can number 1, make the item yourself, and number 2, improve it to flawless quality at a smithing skill level of 57, which is far easier to get than 100. You may also have noticed that if you wanted to improve your steel item to epic without the perk, then you wouldn't be able to, as the max smithing skill is 100, and this would require a skill of 134. Now, strictly speaking, you could use fortify smithing equipment and potions to achieve this without unlocking the steel perk, but the most simple solution is to unlock the perk and then be able to improve the steel item to epic quality at smithing level 74. As you can see on the screen, each time you improve a weapon, it's going to deal more damage, and each time you improve a piece of armour, it will offer you more protection, with chest armour receiving a larger boost for each improvement than all other pieces of armour. To actually make an improvement to an item, you simply need to approach the grindstone in the case of a weapon, or the workbench in the case of a piece of armour. Then, providing that you have the required materials for the improvement, which will be shown at the bottom of the screen, you'll then be able to select craft and the improvement will be made to your item. Oh, and one final thing to note regarding improving items is that while smithing allows you to create jewellery, it doesn't allow you to improve jewellery like it does with weapons and armour. So you now know how to make and improve items using smithing. But how do you level your smithing skill and unlock the perks that will enable you to create the very best items available? Well, leveling your smithing skill is actually very simple. All you need to do is create and improve items. The typical way of doing this as quickly and simply as possible is to craft large numbers of cheap items, such as iron daggers. As you can see on the screen, as you level your smithing skill, you'll be able to unlock new perks in the smithing perk tree. And these perks allow you to create new types of weapons and armour. Broadly speaking, the right side of the perk trees unlocks the various tiers of heavy armour, as well as a number of different types of weapon, and the left side unlocks light armour, as well as the remaining weapon types.
I say broadly speaking, as you do get access to some mid-quality heavy armour on the left side through the Advanced Armours perk. It's also worth noting that while the right side offers stronger craftable weapons in the base game, with both ebony and daedric weapons being stronger than glass weapons, if you have the Dawnguard DLC installed, you'll actually be able to unlock the ability to craft dragonbone weapons. And this is due to the changes that the DLC made to the final perk in the tree. This perk is accessible from either side of the perk tree, and in the base game it allows you to craft both light and heavy varieties of dragonbone armour. However, with Dawnguard installed, it will also allow you to produce dragonbone weapons. Now, dragonbone weapons are stronger than both ebony and daedric weapons, meaning that if you have Dawnguard installed, then you're going to be able to create the very best craftable weapons regardless of which side of the perk tree you go for. Finally, you may have noticed there's also this lonely perk in the middle that allows you to improve magic items, meaning an item that has an enchantment on it. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about smithing, so let's finish this video off with a very quick summary of cooking, which is really just a small additional feature rather than a fully fledged skill like enchanting, alchemy or smithing. However, it does have its uses. Why bother with cooking in the first place? Well, it offers a number of beneficial effects to your health, stamina and magicka, including regeneration and fortify effects that can easily be the difference between life and death in combat. And this of course makes cooking particularly useful at higher difficulty settings. The cooking process in Skyrim is very simple. You first need to find cooking equipment in the form of either a cooking spit or a cooking pot, and these can be found in many different locations in Skyrim. However, the easiest place to find them is typically at inns or within player houses. I have a separate guide on player houses that I'll link in the description for those interested. The second thing you're going to need is raw ingredients, which can be found pretty much everywhere. You'll find them growing in fields, in NPC shops and houses, in dungeons, when looting animals you've killed, and the list goes on. A good policy is to just loot every ingredient you find, storing them all in a player house if you start to run out of carry capacity. In particular, I'd advise you to loot every salt pile you find, as this ingredient features in a large number of recipes. Once you have your equipment and ingredients, the process is very simple. You just need to interact with the cooking station, select a recipe from the menu on the left hand side and press create. There's no skill attached to cooking, so you don't need to level it up in any way, and you'll start the game with every recipe already available to you. In fact, the only reason that you'd be missing a certain recipe is if you don't have the associated DLC installed. This is because a number of recipes were introduced with the Dragonborn and Herfire DLCs, as well as some in the Anniversary Edition. Of course, to get started in any of these crafting skills, it can't harm to have a little gold behind you. So next up, I'm going to give you 5 techniques for making gold at a low level. Every one of these techniques can be pursued from the moment that you leave Helgen, and none of them rely on cheating or using exploits. First up, you can make some very easy money using alchemy. The general principle is to loot every single ingredient you come across, combine them into potions using alchemy, and then flog them for a tasty profit. Of course, some potions are worth more than others, and the value of your potions will depend on the ingredients that you combine, as well as your alchemy skill level. I have a separate guide on how to level alchemy, and I'll link that in the description down below. Anyway, to be optimal, you may want to Google a list of the highest value potions and the ingredients that they require. Some of them can net you ridiculous amounts of gold for a single potion, as you can see on the screen right now. Moving on to our second technique, which is using transmutation to turn iron ore into silver and gold, and then using that gold to create expensive jewelry using smithing. The first thing you're going to need to do is get the transmute spell, which can be found at Halted Stream Camp at this location on the map. Once you get to the camp, you're going to need to enter the mine, kill the guard and loot their key to get through the first gate, and then clear out the bandit leader and their cronies in the next room. Once you've dealt with the bandit leader and their merry friends, you can head over to this table to loot the spell tome. You then simply need to learn the spell and start using it to convert iron ore into silver ore and then the resulting silver ore into gold ore. It's worth noting here that you use the exact same spell for both types of transmutation. The spell will always prioritize turning silver into gold if you have silver ore in your inventory, and then when you run out of silver ore in your inventory, it will start prioritizing the iron ore in your inventory and turning that into silver ore, and then you can just repeat it from there. If you don't have any ore at all, then don't worry, iron ore can be found all over the world in Skyrim. Just don't forget to take a pickaxe with you. There are actually a few pickaxes that you can loot at Halted Stream Camp, or failing that you can just buy one from a blacksmith. You're also going to need gems to make jewellery, but the good news here is that they're also mined from ore veins, so you're going to organically get some gems when looking for iron. Additionally, both ore and gems can be found through random looting and stealing, as well as being available for purchase from some shopkeepers. Next, you're going to need to find some smithing equipment, such as the set just outside of War Maidens in Whiterun. If you're unsure about how smithing works, then I'll link my beginner's smithing guide in the description down below. But basically, once you've found some iron ore and transmuted it into silver and then gold, you'll need to take your gold to the smelter and turn it into gold ingots. Once you have your ingots and your gems, you then just need to head over to the forge and use them to create some expensive jewellery that you can sell for an easy profit. Moving on to method number 3, which involves using enchanting to significantly increase the value of items before selling them. This is a great one to combine with the previous method, as you've already done all of the work to create jewellery, so sticking an enchant on it to get a bit more value out of it just makes sense. You can also enchant weapons, armour and jewellery that you loot as part of normal gameplay, which makes this a pretty organic and easy way to make gold as part of a more natural playthrough. You will of course need to understand how enchanting works to take advantage of this method, but it's really not that complex, and as with alchemy and smithing, I have a beginner's enchanting guide on my channel, and I'll link it in the description down below. Now, not all enchants are equal, and if you want to maximise your gold, then you'll need to get your hands on some of the more expensive enchantments available in the game, such as the Banish Daedra enchantment for weapons. Generally, weapon enchantments are the most profitable, but it doesn't mean that they're the only ones worth pursuing. You can also use various enchantments, for example water breathing, to increase the value of the jewellery that you've already made using the previous method. The profit is nowhere near as large as some of the weapon enchantments, however, like we already said, if you've already made the jewellery, why not maximise your return? There are many enchants in the game and it would take way too long to list them all here, but a quick Google search will give you what you need. It's also worth noting that as your enchanting skill becomes higher, you'll be able to add more powerful enchantments to an item, and as a result you'll be able to sell that item for more money. Moving on to gold making method number 4, which is engaging in some good old fashioned crime. All you really need to get started is membership of the Thieves Guild, a few lockpicks, and a wanton disregard for the law. In terms of joining the Thieves Guild, you may have already guessed that I have a guide for that, which I'll link in the description. And the reason that you need to do this is so that you can gain access to a fence in order to sell your stolen items, as you won't be able to sell them to any other merchant. On top of this, you'll also gain access to some decently profitable missions, as well as some fantastic items and a generally enjoyable questing experience. One particularly easy way to make a bit of gold early on in the Thieves Guild questline is during a quest called Dampened Spirits, which is the second main quest that you'll be given after you've joined. This quest takes place primarily at Honningbrew Meadery. Basically, after you finish the quest, Malus Macius will become a fence. And the beauty of this is that he'll actually stay in place at the meadery, which will allow you to steal all of the mead in the building and sell it straight back to him, rather than having to cart it all to a fence in Riften. It is worth noting, however, that there is a known bug in which Malus doesn't actually become a fence. And if this happens to you, then yeah, you're just going to have to sell the mead to the fence in the Ragged Flagon. It's not as efficient, but there's still some easy gold to be made if you're doing the quest anyway. On top of this, I'd also suggest targeting high value areas such as the Markath Treasury House, the various Jarl's living quarters, the College of Winterhold, and the many shops that you will find in Skyrim. Just don't get caught. A final tip when it comes to stealing is to target items with a favourable value to weight ratio. This is so that you don't become encumbered with a load of low value heavy armour, for example. Ingredients, gems and jewellery are all good examples of this type of item. My fifth and final gold making tip for you is the simplest of all, and it's probably the one to go for if you don't even want to think about making gold and you'd rather just play the game whilst making some gold organically. If this is you, then I'd suggest joining the Dark Brotherhood as soon as you leave Helgen, and then following the storyline all the way through. Not only is this one of the best questlines in the entire game, it also gives you access to some excellent weapons and armour, as well as a whopping 20,000 gold reward for completing the final mission. There is no other quest in the game that I'm aware of that gives this much gold for a single mission. So this is a great one for getting a nice chunk of gold for simply following a quest chain.
So that's how to get a few coins in your purse early on. Now I want to move on to some more, let's say, miscellaneous features of the game, starting with two of the quirkier features, the ability to become both a vampire and a werewolf. So in this next section, I'm going to start by showing you how to become a vampire.
We're also going to cover the pros and cons of vampirism, how to feed on victims, how to cure vampirism if you change your mind, and at the end of the video we'll even look at how to become a powerful vampire lord as part of the Dawnguard DLC. So why bother becoming a vampire in the first place? Well, there are a number of benefits that you can gain from contracting the vampiric disease, and these benefits are tied to the 4 stages that you go through as your vampirism progresses. Firstly, you gain access to 5 totally new abilities. At stage 1 you gain Vampire's Drain, an ability that drains the health of your target and funnels it back to you, basically dealing some steady damage whilst increasing your own survivability. And this spell becomes more powerful as you progress through the 4 stages of vampirism. Also at stage 1 you gain access to the Vampire's Servant ability. Now this is a spell that allows you to reanimate a dead body to fight for you for 60 seconds. And again, this becomes more powerful at later stages of vampirism, allowing you to reanimate more powerful bodies as you progress through the stages. And finally, at stage 1 you also receive Vampire's Sight, which allows you to see in the dark for 60 seconds. At stage 2 you gain access to the Vampire's Seduction spell, which basically allows you to pacify an NPC once per day so that you can feed on them even if they're awake. We'll cover more on feeding later in the video. You gain access to the final ability once you progress to stage 4. This is called Embrace of Shadows, which is a spell that allows you to become invisible for 180 seconds once per day. On top of those abilities, you also gain a bonus to your illusion spells and sneak ability, making vampirism a strong choice for stealth characters. You get a 100% resistance to disease and poison, as well as varying degrees of frost resistance based on your stage of vampirism. Rather than go through every single detail for each phase, I'll put the information up on the screen now so that you can pause and review the details if you want to. However, it's not all sunshine and roses in Vampire Town. There are also downsides to vampirism, which also become progressively worse as you move through the 4 stages. These include a weakness to fire and an attribute reduction when exposed to sunlight, as you can see on the screen, and again you might want to pause to review. Not shown on the table, however, is the 3rd downside of vampirism, and probably the most significant one in terms of its impact on your gameplay. This is the fact that the majority of NPCs will dislike you once you become a vampire, which will negatively influence your interactions with them. And at stage 4 of vampirism, you'll actually be attacked on sight if you don't have the Dawnguard DLC installed. The Dawnguard DLC changed a lot of things about how NPCs interact with vampires and made it a lot easier to play as a vampire in Skyrim. You probably have it installed because it's part of the special edition, but it's worth checking. If you have the DLC installed, you'll only get attacked if you're in Vampire Lord form, and we'll get onto that later in the video. Okay, now that you understand the pros and cons of becoming a vampire, let's talk about how to actually become one. It's pretty simple really. You need to go and find a vampire, of which there are many in the game. And I would recommend that you go and find one at Haymar's Shame, at this location on the map. The reason I draw attention to this location in particular is that it can be easily reached early in the game as there's a direct route from Helgen. You just need to follow the path through the mountains. You then need to engage a vampire in combat and let them cast Vampiric Drain on you until you receive a prompt telling you that you have contracted Sanguinare Vampiris, if that's how it's pronounced. Anyway, once you have the disease, you'll need to wait 3 days for the disease to progress to full vampirism. It's extremely obvious when you transform into a vampire as you gain a message telling you that your vampiric powers have been activated, and the appearance of your character will actually change, as you can see here. At this point, you're a full-fledged vampire and you've entered the 1st stage of vampirism. From this point onwards, you'll advance to a new stage of vampirism every 24 hours if you don't feed on a victim. And you'll gain the effects associated with that stage, as we explored in the previous sections. If you feed at any stage, you'll be reset to stage 1, so you don't need to feed 3 times to get from stage 4 back to stage 1. How do you actually feed as a vampire? Well, you basically need to sneak up on a sleeping NPC and use the feed function as I'm showing now. You can even feed on an NPC whilst they're awake by using the vampire's seduction ability to pacify them. Of course, as mentioned before, you'll only have this ability if you've progressed to at least stage 2 of vampirism. But what if you contract the vampiric disease accidentally, or change your mind about being a vampire? Well, you can actually cure vampirism, but the way you do this is going to depend on how far the disease has progressed. For the first 3 days after picking up the Sanguinare Vampiris disease from a vampire, you can simply use a cure disease potion, just like with any other disease. You can also remove the disease by consuming hawk feathers or from receiving a shrine blessing. However, if 3 days have passed and you've progressed to full-blown vampirism, then you're going to need to go to an innkeeper and ask for any rumours that they've heard. You may have to ask the same question a few times until they mention Thalion, and give you a quest called Rising at Dawn. Once you have this quest, it's going to direct you to travel to Morphal. You'll then need to walk to this location on the map to find Thalion, and he's only going to be there between the hours of 1 and 5 AM. But it makes sense to meet him here, as this is ultimately where he's going to perform the ritual to cure your vampirism. You're going to want to turn up with a filled black soul gem if possible, as Thalion requires this item to perform the ritual. If you don't already have one, Thalion will actually sell you one, though it's empty and you're going to have to go and fill it with a reasonably powerful enemy. Once you have a filled black soul gem, Thalion is going to ask you to meet him at the location that you're already at dawn, which in Skyrim is 5 AM. You then need to simply interact with him and he will perform the ritual and cure your vampirism. An alternative method is to become a werewolf through the companion's questline, as this will also remove your vampirism. However, it's a very long-winded way of getting a cure if you haven't already progressed the companion's quest chain, but it's an option nonetheless. I'll probably put out a werewolf video soon after this one, so keep an eye on my channel if you're interested in that as well. Finally, you may be aware that as part of the Dawnguard DLC, you have the ability to become a special type of vampire called a Vampire Lord. Vampire Lords get access to another full set of new abilities, including a Raise Dead spell, the ability to evade damage by transforming into a swarm of bats for 2 seconds, and a new version of Vampiric Drain, which rather than just draining health as with normal vampirism, it also drains magicka and stamina, as well as applying an additional damage health effect. Basically, it's just a lot more powerful than the normal version of the spell, as you can see on the screen right now. It's also worth noting that this ability is only available when you're hovering, and you can switch between hovering and walking stances by using the stealth key while in Vampire Lord form. As well as these new abilities, you also gain access to a whole new skill tree, offering perks that will greatly enhance your abilities and even add some new ones whilst you're in Vampire Lord form. To advance through this skill tree, you simply need to use your Vampire Lord abilities to kill enemies. And finally, on top of everything else, while in Vampire Lord form you'll gain significant increases to your health, magicka and stamina, as well as benefiting from enhanced magicka regen, improved unarmed skill, improved damage resistance, and even the ability to walk or hover on water. On the negative side, your total health, magicka and stamina are reduced during daylight, and your stamina regen is also reduced by a substantial 90% in daylight. Perhaps most significantly of all, as you can see, it's pretty obvious that you're a Vampire Lord once you go into Vampire Lord form, and the vast majority of NPCs will be hostile to you. So to actually become a Vampire Lord, you need to accept Harkon's gift as part of the Dawnguard DLC's main quest chain. You'll be offered this option pretty early on during the Bloodline quest after returning with Serana to Castle Volkihar. Though it is worth noting that this will permanently ally you with the vampire faction for the whole of the Dawnguard DLC story. He can transform you into a Vampire Lord regardless of whether you're currently a vampire or not, and he can even do it if you're a werewolf, though you'll no longer be a werewolf should you choose to accept. It's also worth noting that once you become a Vampire Lord, you will automatically become a normal vampire when you're not in Vampire Lord form. Alternatively, you can have Serana transform you at a later stage of the questline. This will allow you to refuse Harkon's gift and align yourself with the Dawnguard, but still become a Vampire Lord. Specifically, this option will be offered to you by Serana at the end of the Chasing Echoes quest, as a way for you to enter the Soul Cairn. Be careful though, you won't get this option if you're already a regular vampire, because you'll be considered to be effectively dead and able to enter the Soul Cairn without Serana having to transform you. If you do happen to miss this, don't worry, Serana will give you the option again at the end of the Dawnguard DLC questline, and that's regardless of which faction you aligned yourself with. Once you've received the gift from either Harkon or Serana, then you simply need to use the lesser power that will have been added to your spellbook.
Okay, moving on from vampirism, in this next section I'm going to show you how to become a werewolf.
We're also going to cover the pros and cons of being a werewolf, how to level your werewolf skills and unlock new abilities, and how to cure yourself if you change your mind. So why bother becoming a werewolf in the first place? Well, there are a number of powerful and fun benefits that you can gain from lycanthropy. The vast majority of these benefits are tied to the beast form greater power that you receive on becoming a werewolf. Beast form allows you to transform into a werewolf for 150 seconds once per day. When in werewolf form, your health will increase by 50, your stamina will increase by 100, your stamina regeneration will be improved, your unarmed damage will increase, you'll become more damage resistant, your movement speed will be enhanced, and you'll even gain a bonus to your carrying capacity. On the negative side, your health regeneration will be reduced while in beast form. However, you will gain the ability to feed on victims in order to heal yourself, as well as extending your beast form by 30 seconds for each feed. On top of all of this, you'll gain 3 new Howl type abilities. Firstly, you'll get an area of effect fear spell that also causes nearby wolves to come and help you in combat, which is pretty cool. Secondly, you get the ability to summon 2 pack members to temporarily fight beside you. And finally, you get a detect life ability to help you stalk your prey. As a werewolf, you also gain 100% disease resistance, even when outside of beast form. Now that was a lot of information, so I'll pop a summary up on the screen so that you can pause and review it in your own time. If you have the Dawnguard DLC installed, which comes packaged with Skyrim Special Edition, so you probably do, then you'll also gain access to a whole new skill tree, with 11 new perks available for you to unlock. These perks offer a number of powerful upgrades to your werewolf form and abilities, such as increasing your damage as a werewolf up to 100%, further increasing your health and stamina, providing you with more health when feeding, and greatly enhancing your howls. Again, I'll pop the full perk information up on the screen now so that you can pause and review it in your own time. Unlike other perk trees, the werewolf tree doesn't actually have a skill attached to it, so you don't need to gain experience and level that skill in the normal way, you simply need to unlock the perks. To unlock these perks, you need to feed on victims while in werewolf form, with each perk requiring an increasing number of feeds to unlock. To feed on a victim, they firstly have to be dead, whether you killed them or not, and then you just need to approach them and press the feed option. It's also worth noting that you can't feed on undead NPCs, even werewolves have to draw the line somewhere, I guess. The downsides of being a werewolf aren't as severe as those of being a vampire, though one of them is that you can't be a werewolf and a vampire at the same time, so that's worth considering. I actually have a vampirism guide in the same playlist as this video if you're interested in that. I'll link it in the description. Aside from that, the only downside of being a werewolf when outside of beast form is that you'll lose the ability to gain resting bonuses from sleeping, which basically allow you to level skills faster. If you are in beast form, however, there is the obvious downside that most NPCs will attack you on sight, so watch out for that. You also don't actually get an option to exit beast form manually, you have to wait for it to wear off, which can be a mild annoyance if you need to do something that requires speaking to an NPC after a fight. You can of course just use the wait function to speed this up. It's a pretty minor inconvenience overall though, and overall your status as a werewolf doesn't really have any impact on your interactions with NPCs, at least whilst outside of beast form. Again, this is very different to vampires who are pretty much universally hated unless you have the Dawnguard DLC installed. So now that we've talked about the benefits and downsides of being a werewolf, how do you actually become one? Funnily enough, this is the really simple part. You just need to complete the second major quest in the Companions quest chain. It's called the Silver Hand. During this quest, you'll be invited to attend a secret meeting at the Underforge in Whiterun, which is very close to the Companions headquarters. And there, Ayla the Huntress will carry out a ritual that grants you the beast form greater power. You'll then be put into beast form for the first time and basically let loose in Whiterun. Now be warned that all NPCs will be hostile to you at this point, and while you won't receive a bounty for killing people while in beast form, as they didn't see you transform, you always want to be careful which NPCs you kill in Skyrim. Most really important NPCs are unkillable, but there's still plenty of stuff you can miss out on by killing some of the less important ones. I'd actually recommend avoiding Whiterun or even just waiting where you wake up outside the Underforge until beast form wears off. Once it does wear off, you'll wake up in the middle of nowhere with what I can only assume is a werewolf hangover.
and the companion's quest chain will continue from there. It's worth noting here that when you first become a werewolf, you'll only receive the first of the 3 Howl abilities, the ones we listed earlier in the video. This is Howl of Terror, and you'll need to unlock the other howls by completing quests for Ayla, and these will only become available once you've completed the full companion's quest line. Following that, you'll be able to change your active howl at the Underforge by using the totems, and you can only have 1 howl active at any given time. Finally, let's talk about curing lycanthropy, in the event that you change your mind about wanting to be a werewolf. Well, you can actually cure yourself in a couple of ways. Firstly, during the Glory of the Dead quest, which is the final part of the companion's quest line, you'll be able to cure yourself at Iskramor's tomb by using the Flame of the Harbinger. This quest involves you going to Glenmoral Cove and killing Glenmoral witches in order to loot their heads. You then need to take a head to Iskramor's tomb and toss it into the Flame of the Harbinger in order to cure Kodlak's lycanthropy. The main thing that you need to remember is to loot at least 2 of these Glenmoral witches' heads, and there are 5 available in Glenmoral Cove. After you've cured Kodlak, you can then use another Glenmoral witch's head to cure yourself. You simply need to throw it into the flame just as you did with Kodlak's, and then you need to defeat the spirit wolf that spawns, and at that point you'll be cleared of lycanthropy. This could be one of Skyrim's many bugs, I'm not sure, but if you leave it too long after curing Kodlak before you try to cure yourself, you actually won't be able to use the Flame of the Harbinger, presenting you with a bit of a problem. However, there is a solution. You basically need to go to either Farkas or Vilkas and ask them for work. They will then ask you to help them to cure their lycanthropy, in the same way you just did for Kodlak. And the first step of this will be for them to send you to get the Glenmoral witches' heads. Again, the important thing to remember is to loot 2 heads at least, so that you have 1 to cure the NPC as part of the quest and 1 to cure yourself. This option only becomes available once you've completed the companion's quest line, and it's exactly the same process of chucking the head into the Flame of the Harbinger and defeating the spirit wolf to cure your lycanthropy. Secondly, if you have the Dawnguard DLC, then you can also cure your lycanthropy by allowing either Harkon or Serana to turn you into a vampire lord. Again, I have a full vampirism guide if you want more information on how to do that, and I'll link it in the description. If you then change your mind again and want to turn back into a werewolf after having been cured, then you can visit Ayla after having completed the companion's quest chain, and she will allow you to do so. However, she will only allow you to do it once. And it's important to note that this option also requires you to have the Dawnguard DLC installed. Okay, that's lycanthropy covered. And after all that bloodshed, let's look at 2 of the more wholesome features in the game, the ability to get married and to adopt. And yes, believe it or not, you can do both of these things in Skyrim. So let's start with me showing you how to get married. Marriage offers a number of benefits in Skyrim, including the ability for your spouse to make you some passive gold, provide you with food that boosts your health, stamina and magicka regeneration, offer you the lover's comfort buff that allows you to level your skills 15% faster, and if your spouse owns a property, you can even live there yourself, saving you having to buy an expensive player house. To get married, you need to travel to the Bee and Barb in Riften and speak to an NPC called Maramel. You need to ask him about the Temple of Mara, and then whether you could have a wedding there yourself. He will tell you that you need to obtain an Amulet of Mara, which he will then offer to sell you, which does feel like a bit of a shakedown, but there you go. Once you've purchased the amulet from Maramel, you'll then need to approach the NPC that you wish to marry. There are over 60 NPCs that you can marry, and I'm obviously not going to list them all in this quickfire guide. Google is your friend for that. Now, there are 2 really important things that you need to do in order to be able to ask an NPC to marry you. Firstly, you need to raise their disposition towards you by completing any prerequisite activities that are going to make that NPC eligible for marriage. Some are very easy, and some involve completing entire quest chains. One of the easier examples is that to marry Ufgerd, you simply need to beat her in a fist fight. Not your traditional courtship, but there you go, this is Skyrim after all. You can look up the NPC that you want to marry to find their specific requirements. Secondly, you need to be wearing your Amulet of Mara when you speak to them. This will prompt the NPC to ask you about the amulet and unlock the dialogue in which you can ask them to marry you. Once they agree to marriage, then you need to head to Riften again and speak to Maramel, who at this point will be found at the Temple of Mara. He will then offer to marry you the following day. Use the wait function until the following morning and you'll find your betrothed waiting in the Temple of Mara. You then need to walk down the aisle to initiate the ceremony, run through some brief dialogue, say I do, and you'll be married. Once the ceremony has completed, you'll need to decide where your spouse is going to live. To do so, you simply need to talk to your spouse right after the ceremony, and the options will be based on the properties that each of you own. I'll put out a player housing guide for more on that. Oh, and don't worry, you can very easily move your spouse to a different house later on by speaking to them and suggesting that you move. And like I said, you can also adopt a child, so in this section I'm going to show you how to do exactly that. In terms of benefits, adoption in Skyrim provides you with the option to obtain the Mother's or Father's Love buff, which makes healing spells and potions more effective, as well as the Gift of Charity buff, which increases your speechcraft skill. You can also play games with your children, buy them gifts, bring them home a pet, and ask them to complete certain chores. You know, all that happy family stuff. And on occasion, they'll even give you a gift bag. To adopt a child, you're first going to need to complete the Innocence Lost quest, which you can pick up from this location in Windhelm from Aventus Aretino. He's going to ask you to kill Grelod the Kind at the orphanage in Riften, which can be found at this location on the map. It's worth noting that completing this quest will also trigger the Dark Brotherhood questline. I have a separate guide that covers that, and I'll link it in the description down below for those interested. Once you've killed Grelod and then travelled back to Aventus to complete this quest, then you have two choices. You can either travel back to the orphanage in Riften to adopt a child from there, or you can offer to adopt one of the children that can be found outside of the orphanage, such as Sophie in Windhelm. There are a large number of children to adopt in Skyrim, and I'm not going to list them all here, but you can easily Google it. Regardless of who you choose to adopt, you're first going to need to meet the requirements for adoption. Basically, you need to own a house and then pay to have it upgraded to include a child's bedroom. The cheapest and easiest house to get early on is Breeze Home in Whiterun, and this property can be both purchased from and upgraded by Proventus Avenici within Dragonreach Keep. I am planning to put out a player housing guide in the very near future for those who want a bit more detail. Once you've met the requirements for adoption, you're going to need to travel to Riften and speak to Constance at the orphanage. She'll ask you a few questions about who you are, and you'll get a number of dialogue options based on which quests you've completed. The only ones that she will refuse, as far as I'm aware, is if you say you're a thief or an assassin, so select one of the others. She'll then encourage you to speak to the children in the orphanage, and you can offer to adopt any of them from there. Alternatively, you can skip this step entirely and offer to adopt a child who is not a resident of the orphanage, simply by approaching them, running through their dialogue options, and then offering to adopt them. Whichever child you choose to adopt, they'll immediately start to travel to the house that you specified. Oh, and as a final point, you can actually adopt two children, but they are going to need to live together in the same house. Finally, it's worth knowing that Skyrim has two major DLCs, so I'm going to show you how to start each of them before we wind this video down. Let me start by showing you how to join the Dawnguard DLC. The first thing you need to do is have the Dawnguard DLC installed, which you'll have by default if you're playing Skyrim Special Edition. If you have the DLC installed, then you'll be approached by an orc called Jurak as soon as you enter a main city after reaching level 10, and he'll give you a quest to go to Fort Dawnguard via Dayspring Canyon. If he doesn't show up for some reason, then you can speak to any guard in the city after reaching level 10 and they will offer you the same quest. It's simply called Dawnguard. However, you don't actually have to wait until level 10, as you can also head to Fort Dawnguard immediately after leaving the tutorial if you want to start your playthrough with the Dawnguard questline. Perhaps you want to gain early access to crossbows, or you're planning to play as a vampire lord, for example. Whether you get the quest at level 10, or decide to make your own way at level 1, you'll need to head to Dayspring Canyon, which you can enter through the cave found at this location on the map. You can pause here if you need to. After passing through the cave, you'll eventually encounter an NPC called Agmare, who will actually give you the Dawnguard quest even if you're below level 10. But as with getting the quest from Jurak or a guard, this step is totally optional. Either way, you're simply going to need to follow the road to Fort Dawnguard. And when you get there, you need to speak to Isran inside the fort, who's going to give you a quest called Awakening that will begin the main story of the DLC. One very important thing to note regarding this questline is that you'll eventually have to make a choice about which faction you join. And this is going to happen at the end of the Bloodline quest, in which Lord Harkon will offer to turn you into a vampire lord. If you accept, you'll be permanently aligned with the Volkihar vampire clan. And if you refuse, you can return to Fort Dawnguard and align yourself with the Dawnguard. Then of course you have the Dragonborn DLC, which I'm going to show you how to start right now.
Obviously, the first thing you need to do is have the Dragonborn DLC installed, which you'll have by default if you're playing Skyrim Special Edition. If you do have it installed, then the first thing you're going to need to do is to progress the main storyline in Skyrim to the point that you receive a quest called the Horn of Jurgen Windcaller from the Greybeards. Note here that you don't actually have to complete this quest, you only need to have received it. Receiving the quest is going to trigger an event in which cultists will approach you when you next enter a town, as you can see happening here in Whiterun. If they don't show up immediately when you arrive at the town, then just use the wait function until they do. If all goes to plan and the cultists show up, they'll engage you in a conversation that will end in them attacking you. Once you've defeated them, you'll be able to loot a note from one of their bodies called Cultists' Orders. And reading this note will give you a quest called Dragonborn that will tell you to travel to Solstheim via the docks at Windhelm. The docks can be found just outside of Windhelm at this location on the map. Once you arrive there, you're going to need to speak to Jarland Saltsage, who you'll find on his ship. And at this point you have the option to either pay him for passage, or you can attempt to persuade or intimidate him so that he takes you for free. Either way, he's then going to sail you to Raven Rock in Solstheim, where your quest will be updated to tell you to speak to the townsfolk of Raven Rock. You then simply need to ask people in Raven Rock about Miraak until they direct you to the Temple of Miraak, and you can simply follow the Dragonborn storyline from there. Now, if the cultists don't show up due to a bug, I have heard that you can travel directly to the Temple of Miraak and speak to Freya to trigger the questline. However, when I tried this, Freya wasn't there, so it's definitely not a 100% solution. If the cultists don't show up, I'd recommend visiting different towns to try and spawn them, or reloading a save file from before picking up the Horn of Jurgen Windcaller quest. If none of that works, you could just use a console command to give yourself the cultist orders and trigger the quest. But I'd suggest reading up on console commands before doing so, as they can have unintended consequences.
If you made it this far through the video, well, frankly, that's insane to me, and please let me know in the comments if you did. And if you enjoy the content I make, maybe consider subscribing to my channel, or even signing up for a YouTube or Patreon membership if you'd like access to bonus content. Either way, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.